faces and new faces. When I give these talks, often there's a few people who are new to our practice in the room, so I try to orient them both for you new folks to get a little bit of a feel for basic Zen, what we do here, why we do what we do perhaps, but also many of you come back week after week after week, so I try to give it some depth and give you something to, probably something to gnaw, to bring your great question to. And in Zen, great question is the starting point to practice. Conventionally, we want answers, we want to know something, we want to impress other people with what we know, and ironically, from one point of view, that's exactly what creates suffering. Buddhism is about liberation from suffering. Sometimes it could be said, simply put, finding some joy, some happiness, some peace in our lives for ourselves and others. But of course there's, I don't know, on about 20 people in the room, there's probably 20 definitions of what happiness is. So if you go chasing after the definition of what you think happiness is, that also will lead you to suffering. So we human beings are in quite a box. And the challenge from the perspective of practice is to break the walls of the box. That if we just look for happiness within the walls that we're confined in, we'll chase after things, but we're chasing after fantasies and images. The problem is the box itself. In a sense, we could say that it's inevitable that there will be a box. Almost you could imagine this box holds the human spirit, the human idea together. And in one sense, we need this box. There was a psychologist in the 1970s who was a Buddhist practitioner, and he came up with this saying. He said, first, we need a self in order to let go of the self. So, as a human being, part of our developmental task is to develop some sense of who we are in the world. If that doesn't happen, we start off from a deficit, and we're always chasing after that. And we all know those feelings in ourselves and in others of, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, others are better than me, that person that I look up to has it all together, I don't. That's one side of human suffering. And from that perspective, this box needs to be strong enough to hold us. But once we get that, there's one more step that's necessary. We have to recognize the illusion of the box. And the truth is, there is a place in our life for freedom, for openness, for what we might say non-self. And what we do here at the Zen Center is we push up against those walls. On one hand, we're making our center stronger. When Paul gave meditation instruction tonight, he talked about breathing down into our lower abdomen. It's a critical place to start. Bringing our energy and our attention down into what the Chinese call the Tanzhen, which literally translates energy garden. See, along with this breath down into the lower abdomen, we're asking this question, what am I? We all have this fantasy, this idea, I am, fill in the blank. And that I am may change. Today, maybe it was, I am hot. In December, it's I am cold. I am hot, I am cold? Who is it that's hot? Or better yet, not who is it, what is it that's hot? What is it that's cold? So in Zen, we often use old stories from the old Zen masters in China, or in our case also in Korea, to help illustrate some of these points. So I'm going to read you a story. We call them a kangan, but basically they're old stories from oftentimes maybe the 800s, 900s. So these are pretty old stories. So this one's called Dung San's No Cold or Hot. A monk asked Zen Master Dung San, when cold and hot come, how can we avoid them? It was hot today. How do we avoid the heat? Some people are wearing shorts, really thin shirts, but it's still hot. So this monk is asking a question we all know about. Modern technology, we have air conditioners. That's great. We avoid the heat, right? Except the temperatures keep rising. So we really don't avoid the heat. So when cold and hot come, how can we avoid them? Why don't you go to the place where there is no cold or hot? Now we're in the heart of Zen. We make cold and hot. So Dung San says, why don't you go to the place where there's no cold, no hot? Already a great doubt rises. What is that? What is it? So the monk, just like I just said, he says, what is the place where there is no hot, no cold? He starts off pushing a question. Now he's really curious, because the teacher stopped his mind. That's stopping the mind. It's so important. Stopping the mind doesn't mean we don't have any thoughts ever again. But we think and feel habitually. You know, it's hot today. You probably acted in the heat today just like you acted the last time it was hot. Yesterday it was a little cooler. Tomorrow may be a little hotter. But you know yourself. You act a particular way. You have ideas about yourself. I am like this when it is hot. You make an idea, you get a reality. That's just the way it goes. Repetition breeds habit. Habit breeds belief. Belief breeds the box. There's no one box. Look around the room. Some of the men in the room are clean shaven. Others of us have beards. Why? Why does one choose one thing, another choose another? Then we like to say, it's just my nature. Really? Are you sure it's just your nature? How do you know your nature? Who's this you that has a nature? So, the monk asked again, what is the place where there is no cold or hot? Dung San said, when cold, cold kills you. When hot, hot kills you. He doesn't mean an arrow to the heart and you're dead, your body is dead. But let the heat kill this idea of I. I am hot, I like hot, or I don't like hot, and my whole life unfolds. Kill the idea of I, or maybe more in our Western style, let go of I. Then what's left? So last week we started talking a little bit about this non-self. One of the basic tenets in Buddhism is insight into non-self. And it's often paired with insight into suffering, insight into impermanence, and insight into non-self. In basic Theravada Buddhism, That is the basic teaching of Buddhism. If we could get insight into the fact of suffering, we can find some freedom from that box. The Buddha's first teaching is suffering is the condition of life. Something got put up on our Facebook page last week about suffering, the first of the Four Noble Truths, and somebody wrote in a very interesting perspective on suffering. She comes from a science background, and she started talking about suffering as disequilibrium, and how everything in the universe is in a state of disequilibrium. Actually, even the atoms that exist are always losing or gaining electrons. Everything is in a constant state of flux. That's the human condition. That's the universal condition. We suffer as individuals because we have to deal with that flux, but we don't like it very much. We try to build edifices to prevent things from changing, but change they will. So already I'm into the second of these three things, insight into impermanence. In a way, it's saying impermanence is the natural state of the world that we live in. Suffering is the result if we don't accept it and like it. We fight against it. We push up against it, and we try to make different what actually is. In the process, we suffer. As I was working this week with this insight into non-self, I realized for me personally, of the three, this is the tough one. Insight into suffering, I'm pretty aware of the suffering in life. As Paul said when he introduced me, not only am I a Zen teacher, but I'm also a psychotherapist. I live my work life dealing with, listening to, helping people struggle with, and find some peace with the suffering. In their situation and the life that I lead, I hear about human suffering all the time. You sit in a room like this, and we're all trying to present our best face to one another. Some of you who are new here, you came with somebody else. Even that person who's close to you, you're probably trying to show them your best possible face. We're kind of embarrassed and ashamed of these things that we struggle with. But inside, you already know. And you know what? The person you're with, they know also. Because they know their own experience. And they see it. It's just the way it is. But that lack of acceptance creates so much dissonance in our lives. Sometimes it's so much easier to just say, to admit the truth. Yeah, I'm suffering. Yeah, this is hard for me right now. Then we don't have to play any games anymore. We don't have to present some false front. It's like, yeah, it's true. I'm struggling right now. Everybody in this room is struggling right now. That's the human condition. Just accepting that opens us up for some freedom. We're already pushing at the box. We make that box very tight to control things. If we don't have to control things so much, we can loosen up. And in many ways, what we're doing with the chanting, with the sitting, is just accepting what is. We sit and we witness. We don't avoid. We don't cut off. We don't avoid hot and cold. We let cold kill I. Let heat kill I. What does that mean? I can talk about it, but each one of us needs to find that for ourselves. So in this room, we create an incubator for everybody to find out for themselves. The teaching in a Zen center points you back to yourself. What am I? And the practice is to investigate. The teaching helps us focus, but the actual work is our own. I can't do it for you. Paul can't do it for you. Each one of us has to do it ourselves. All we can do is set the conditions for all of us to do the work. So, insight into suffering's not too hard to see. Insight into impermanence, look at your life. Look at your life. What you're dealing with today was probably not what you were dealing with 2 weeks ago. What was so important 2 weeks ago, today you barely remember. Maybe it was really important so you remember. Maybe someone close to you left and you're grieving, so 2 weeks is too short. Maybe try 2 years. It'll change. Wait long enough, it will change. That's the experience of life. What was here yesterday is gone tomorrow. All of us have had death in our lives. All of us have lost something that we loved. You watch the tree, the deciduous tree for a year. The leaves that were there last year are gone. Now it's springtime, the leaves are back. Wait 6 months, the leaves will be gone. The seasons just change. There's a Japanese saying that deep in the heart of the hottest day in August is the cold breeze of January. Just wait. The situation that we love turns bad eventually. You fall in love, you think it's the greatest thing, you finally found something. Maybe you did. But then you find out there's a lot of work still to be done. How do you bring two lives together? What you liked yesterday, you might not like so much today. Things are always changing. Today you're one age. 2 years ago you were 2 years younger. 2 years from now you'll be 2 years older. 75 years from now, maybe one or two of us will be left. Maybe. 90 years from now, very likely none of us will be left. Maybe one person. And you think, oh, I want to be that one person. But at 110, it'd be interesting to hear you say, I want to be that person. Maybe you will, but maybe you won't. I saw this little thing on the news today about this home for the aged that's run by a university. And in the assisted living unit, they showed this picture of this woman who was 100 years old, and she's the president of the Assisted Living Council. She was on this chair, she was being fed. So you say, I want to be 100, right? Maybe. Depends what 100 is. Everything is always changing. That's the experience of our life. Those of you who come here on Wednesday nights, you hear this all the time. But if you're practicing, then you're becoming aware of all the times you're not accepting the truth of it. It's a reminder every time we hear it. But if you're really practicing, then you touch into the place that you forget. You see the strategies that you have in your life to protect against it. And if you're really paying attention, you can see the suffering that causes. So, the essential quality of suffering in our lives, probably not too hard to understand. Even something as little as those guys playing out in the street. Maybe they're irritating you. Maybe they're pissing you off because you really want to hear better and they're distracting you. That's how easy it is for suffering to appear. Their joy is somebody else's suffering. That's how crazy it is. One person's joy is another person's deep despair. And that's just the way it goes. Suffering's not too hard to see. Impermanence, if you really pay attention to the world, not too hard to see. Brings us back to the tough one. Insight into non-self. I was, in my exploration of this, I realized in Zen and in Buddhism, we are often talking about the Buddha. The Buddha was the one who taught to recognize insight into suffering, insight into impermanence, insight into non-self. I realized that I treat Buddha as a self. There's this guy who did this teaching. And as soon as the idea of Buddha arises in my mind, some concept about him comes along with it. That's how insidious this idea of self is. The Buddha lived somewhere between 25 and 2,700 years ago. I actually have no idea, really, the life of this individual. But in my mind, I can create one. And I do it without even being aware of it. So if I do that for this archetype that recognizes non-self, how easy it is to make myself into a thing, into an object. So many of you know we practice with this question, what am I? And oftentimes people will say, sometimes I change that question to who am I? And I realize when you do that, you're just trying to look around the box and find a better idea of who that person is in the box. Because if you ask, who am I? You're still identifying as a self. If you ask, what am I? You're going right into the question, what is this thing we call I? And the Buddha pointed us in a direction, non-self. He pointed us in the direction of questioning the assumption of my individuality. Because one of the things that the Buddha understood was that everything is completely interconnected. That there is no separate self. Non-self doesn't mean this body doesn't exist. But this body, this mind, is completely interconnected with everything else. If this body doesn't get protection from the frigid cold, this body will die. So cold, body, warmth, they're interconnected. Without this floor, I'd fall to the ground. My separateness is an illusion. But that's nice for me to tell you, but that's not enough. We need to look into it. The Buddha taught a way to find out for ourselves. What am I? Not only looking into it in this room, but moment to moment in our life. We bring this question and we push up against the question, who I think I am, is that really so? Am I who and what I think I am? This isn't a game. It's not a trite idea to play with. It's the path to find freedom, to find out what we actually are, and to find out how to be in this world. Our teacher Zen Master Sung San used to say, first attain your true self, then help all beings. That's the purpose of practice. Find out our true self. We have to break into that box. And we use all these tools to help us discover. So one poem to end, and then we can go to question and answers. Remember the context of non-self. This is a poem by Zen Master Mangang. His art teacher, Zen Master Seung San. His teacher was Zen Master Kobang. Zen Master Kobang's teacher was Zen Master Mangang. So you're back in the early part of the 20th century. Prajna ship. Everything is impermanent, but there is truth. You and I are not two, not one. So we've got impermanence, and we've got non-self. Everything is impermanent, but there is truth. You and I are not two, not one. Only your stupid thinking is non-stop. Already alive in the prajna ship. Already alive. Prajna means wisdom. I looked it up today to see what else I could find about prajna. And interestingly, in traditional Buddhism, the wisdom of prajna points you back to the insight into suffering, the insight into impermanence, and the insight into non-self. Only your stupid thinking is non-stop. That's what sustains the illusion. See through your thinking. See wider than your thinking. And you can realize what the Buddha realized. You're already alive in this incredible thing we call the universe. With wisdom, with compassion, with letting go of this attachment to our small idea of self, it's possible to use this energy to completely be alive in this world. Helping, interacting, experientially alive. Already alive, only we don't know it. Already alive, but we do all of this thinking and feeling and protecting to fence ourselves in and in essence kill ourselves. But we're already alive. That's what the Buddha taught. And our job is to find that and manifest it in our lives. Question? Comment? Anything anybody wants to talk about? If you're new here, anything about what we do here at the Zen Center that you might be curious about, anything at all?
Can I just speak?
Please.
Like putting I in quotation marks.
You have to speak up a little for me.
I feel like putting I in quotation
Yeah,
marks.
I get it. It's very hard to not use the pronouns.
I am about to start studying to be a psychologist at the Wright Institute. So I'm really curious about your psychotherapy work. And I haven't studied much Zen philosophy, but I'm wondering how your philosophy comes out in your practice, in your psychotherapy practice, and how
It's more experiential than philosophical. But if I say Zen is about freedom and liberation, I see psychotherapy in the same way. It's the basic question is the same. What am I? In a psychotherapeutic context, you may deal with the story of I a little bit more, in a little bit more detail. But from my perspective as the person who's, I guess, the therapist in that context, it's still about questioning the assumption of I. Being able to find those places that the story falls apart. If we investigate far enough and deeply enough, what generally we find is it doesn't actually hold together. You know, our consciousness is really good at taking two things and making them connect. Two dots and a line, and we see a face. Our consciousness fills in the gaps. We think those gaps are filled in with logic and rationality, and it really holds together. When you start to investigate, it's my experience that you find out it falls apart. Even some of us think in words, other people think in pictures, I suppose, but those of us, like myself, who primarily is aware of the thinking in words, my idea is I'm thinking a complete thought and I can just say what I've thought. It doesn't work. The thought that I think is a complete thought happens in a flash. To say it out loud takes a number of seconds. My thought that I believe is to be a complete thought is not one. But my mind fills in the gap. So, whereas mostly we try to avoid things falling apart, from the perspective of Zen, and honestly in the perspective of psychotherapy, you're encouraging the edifice to fall apart so that with the pieces all on the ground, you can start to wonder, well, what is it really? And that's how you find your way. So there are different contexts. The modality is somewhat different, but the point is the same. Okay? There's a lot more I can say, but I'll leave it for now. It's because all of that is just things you can say about it are ideas. Practice is experiential, and actually so is psychotherapy. It's not the idea, it's the experience. The idea, often in a Zen interview, somebody will respond to a question like that koan that I read, that koan that I read, and they'll give you an idea. And it's, no, that's your story. Show me. Be it. Experience is the way, not mental ideas. Okay?
So, just a little follow-up question. So, do you actually explicitly talk to your psychotherapy clients you work with about these ideas, or is it more, it sounds like it's more just the presence you bring is informed by this work you do?
It depends. With some people, especially people who have some grounding in practice, I might be very explicit with it. For those who don't, I may never mention the word.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. If there's some grounding, it may be helpful as teaching, but I said before, the teaching part is pointing the way. The individual, each one of us has to do the work. Okay. Anybody else? Question?
Hi.
Please.
What are the four truths that you were speaking of?
The Four Noble Truths. Life is suffering. You heard me talk about suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. Desire is like a thirst. We crave, we go after things, we try to get things to, and that process in and of itself creates the suffering. The third is there's a way out of suffering, and the fourth is the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path, I wish by now I could give you all 8 of them, but the Eightfold Path is essentially, it's almost like a manual, how to live your life. Like the first one is right view. In Buddhism, right view is, I think, better stated as no view. See through your own perspective to see things as they are. Sometimes it's said that one, I call them folds of the Eightfold Path, that one encompasses everything. Because we're so stuck in our own particular view, and then we believe our view as truth, and then we lose our way. So if we can let go, we sometimes say put down our own perspective, then we can actually see what's happening. It's as if we wear a pair of sunglasses all the time, and everything we see comes through those glasses. So our whole perspective is based on the color of those glasses. So I have Jeff glasses, Paul has Paul glasses, but if you take the glasses off, then you see things as they really are. And that's the beginning point. And then the other ones are things like right speech, right attention, right intention, right livelihood, right mindfulness, right concentration, and I'm leaving two out. But those kind of things, it's almost like a manual how to keep yourself on track. What am I? How do I live this life? What kind of life can I lead that will bring peace, harmony, and benefit to the world, rather than greed, anger, and desire? And that's what the Buddha taught. That's all the Buddha taught. He didn't care too much about philosophy. In this, as I said, I was doing a little bit of reading online, and often the people writing the articles would point out the Buddha didn't say yes or no to philosophical questions. He said it doesn't matter. What matters is you've got this suffering that's overtaken you, and practice is about finding a way out of this prison of suffering. So sometimes people ask, is there God in Buddhism? Buddha didn't talk about God. He didn't say yes or he didn't say no. That's why it doesn't matter. Everybody in here has their own idea of God. It doesn't matter. Some practitioners in our Zen Center are priests and ministers in different religions. Some people are total atheists. It makes no difference. It's a matter of suffering and the release from suffering. Okay? Yeah, please.
So, what makes Buddhism a religion?
That's a really good question. Some will even say it's not one. If you look up the definition of religion, it talks about having ceremonies and liturgy to help for people to work with. And as you saw tonight, we do chanting, we have a particular style, we wear these robes. These are all forms that conventionally make it a religion. But many of us come to Buddhism not having any interest in religion. Many of us came from other religions and left them because we didn't like what we were finding. And in Buddhism, and Zen in particular, since we're a Zen center, people are able to find a home because it's not about belief. Even if you call Zen or Buddhism a religion, it's not a religion based on belief. There are teachings, and the teachings help us, but it's an experiential practice. So for me, I came to it much more for the philosophy and the guidance in everyday life that it brought, not for any theistic point of view. Okay?
I had an experience the other day where I was going to have breakfast, and I was out on Zen Pablo, and someone outside the restaurant was begging. And I was tired, and I'd been busy, and so I just ignored him totally. It's like almost like a fly. I didn't brush him off, but I almost felt like I wanted to brush him off. And I went in, and I only had an ATM card for one thing.
That'd be good.
It's all like that. But it was like, but what I did was I just kind of forgot about it. Because I realized I didn't have the answer to how am I supposed to. Like part of me started to say, well, I should have had more compassion.
Say that again.
Part of me thought I should have more compassion, but I really wasn't feeling it. And so. I don't know if I have a question, but because I think with religion we get an idea, well, I should always be like Jesus or something.
Right.
Just give them something, I don't know what, pat on the head, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I think from our perspective of Zen, that you are wondering about it is the point.
That's the practice.
That's the practice. You can argue whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to give somebody who begs money. But the fact that you're wondering about it is the whole point. That's where the freedom comes from. If there's a rule I have to give it, then some days I feel kind of rebellious and I say, fuck that, I'm not going to follow that rule. So you're just into this kind of tension.
It's a good question is to keep it open.
The question is the point. The fact that you are aware of it and that you're wondering about it is practice. You don't have to figure it out. You and I, we teach this stuff, but we don't know. And we can fall into this idea we should have an answer. But the real jewel is in the question. Because the question opens everything up. So thanks for sharing the question. That's helping to save all sentient beings. Okay?
Jeff, now, to follow up, it's very interesting too. The wondering, there's a way of wondering and keeping the question alive that is productive, if you want, but
Reductive?
productive.
Productive.
But there are ways of wondering and an event like that certainly take our mind to a place that is just destructive,
Right.
in which there is no growth,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah,
So how do you
yeah.
distinguish that?
You know, in China, they talk about great doubt. That's what we're talking about. Great doubt. Our teacher, Zen Master Sun San, pointed out one of the biggest hindrances is what he called checking mind. That's what you were talking about. It's that mind that falls into self-doubt. Oh, I should have given him that money. Oh, I'm such a terrible person. I didn't give money. I'm supposed to be compassionate. Oh, I'm really not compassionate. And that loop solidifies into self-doubt. This doubt we're talking about is not self-doubt in better or worse. It's using the question to open, to be curious, to wonder. There are stories I hear. People hear this used doubt and they turn it against themselves. And they become very narrow and rigid in trying to keep things just so. It doesn't work. You end up more disappointed, more confused, less, I want to say confident, but that's not the right word, less centered in your Tangen, and more tight and lost in your thinking and feeling mind.
So it's almost like I could have a solution. I always have 8 quarters in my pocket. So I see at least 8 people with 8 quarters. Yeah, that's not really the answer either.
Yeah.
I mean, I just start presenting that.
Right,
It's a formula.
right.
You know? Right.
I have a rule, and I see where it causes me trouble. I don't give to people at a stoplight. I don't like that they're out in the street, so I don't give it to them. I say it, you're laughing, it's ridiculous. But that's what I do. So, it really doesn't matter, you know, everybody's got an idea. Do it, that's okay. So I don't give when somebody's at a stoplight. And I kind of try not to make eye contact. It's ridiculous. Every 2 days a week I drive across the bridge and I get off, it's at that Octavia Causeway, and there's big signs on, they did plantings, they put up chains, no panhandling here. Every time I go, there's somebody sitting there. And I don't like it. You know, but I realize that's my idea, I'm not right. And I can even get a little pissed off about the person 3 cars up because they're giving money. So first of all, that's encouraging the guy to be there, or the woman to be there. But not only that, I want to get through the light. And they're giving money. But the most important thing for me is to witness. So I get to watch all of that story in my mind. It doesn't mean I have to give money there, but I get to watch and observe how this stupid thinking operates. And in awareness, there's a possibility to do something different. as I'm saying this, probably once in a while I should give a buck. Just because I hate it. You know, I often say to people, people complain sometimes. Some people don't like chanting. Some people don't like bowing. I'm not too crazy about bowing myself. But you know, I think it's really valuable to have an aspect of practice that we don't like. If we only do what we like, we keep massaging that idea of self. It becomes very egoistic. This is good practice, so I'll do that. This is bad practice, so I don't do that. But how do I really know what good practice and bad practice? And we're all faced with these situations in our lives that we don't want to deal with, but we have to. So it's quite valuable to do things as a practice that push up against our likes and dislikes. It doesn't mean you have to like it. Just do it and watch. See what happens. That is practice. Okay, last question, Marshall. We're all a couple minutes over.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, ask your question. Or make
You were talking about the difference between what am I and who am I. And I actually find who am I very valuable sometimes, and especially when I'm in conversation with someone, and especially meeting new people. I once worked at an Alzheimer's facility. It was amazing. You just walk in the door and you have a conversation maybe with somebody you knew very well, one of the residents, but you had no idea who you were going to be in this situation. You know, are you going to be the good friend? Are you going to be the lover? Or am I going to be like the ex-boyfriend who dissed you last year and then just come to you crying and saying, "You ruined my life"? And so it was constantly this idea of just who am I now? Who am I now? And I often use that now when I'm meeting new people. And, you know, and
the caution, not good or bad, but the caution, it still makes you into a self. I am something. I am this or that. I'm the lover or the mother. But those are identities. That's really not who you are. Even if you're the mother, you're not really the mother. That's an idea. You're the experience of doing it. So you're a seasoned enough practitioner, I'm not going to say don't use that. But be careful. Even be careful if you're using what am I? Because that can become a concept, an idea that you fall asleep with. So really, there's a very famous Zen phrase that you all know very well. Be careful, watch your step. Pay attention. Anything can be turned into a support for the self. So be careful. Pay attention. That's our job. That's Zen practice. Thanks very much.